Hello, it's Marcus Cattani here from Edith Cowan University. I'd like to give a talk that I've just done for the Oz IMM Health and Safety Society for October Safety Month. So I've also attended the SLIP, which is a presentation put on by ACT, who are a group of actors and an organisation that puts a play on regarding an actual event, and I'd thoroughly recommend going along to that. Also, have a look at the Safe Work Australia National Safety Month, because there's some useful slides there and information, and it helps us to focus on health and safety, and some of the initiatives there can be quite useful. Okay, so I'm just going to give this talk on leadership and risk management for engineers and scientists, and show how that can be applied to psychosocial hazards. Before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mars Centre, which is the organisation the government have funded to do research and education. So the talk I'm going to go through is on the screen here, and I'll allow you to have a look at that, but I'll move forward. So the Mars Centre is the result of a competitive tender that ECU won to contribute to research and education in the mental awareness, respect and safety area. So our organisation, Edith Cowan University, has appointed Tim Bentley as the chair of that Mars Centre, and all of these other people are involved in teaching and research that contribute to enhancing work health and safety leadership capabilities in the mining industry. So it's a tremendous collegial approach to research and education. We have three main parts of our program. We have an engagement program, so there's around about 300 people who have been involved in our program over the last year since we got the funding. We have an amazing research program with 10 or 11 research projects going on at the moment to improve our understanding of mental awareness, respect and safety. And we have a teaching program. Our first group of people have been through the graduate certificate, and excellent feedback about that. And we have an undergraduate program that's just started, and we're planning on a series of short courses. And people who complete any part of that are kept in touch with how we're progressing through our alumni. So we've got a great opportunity for improving safety and leadership capability. Any information that you'd like, just please contact us at the Mars Centre. Okay, so let's get into a little bit about risk management. So I'm going to give an overview of risk management, and in particular focusing on why it adds value. So first of all, let's have a look about what risk is. So there's quite a nice definition from ISO 31000, which is Risk Management Principles and Guideline. And that definition is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So I think about effect as being the outcome of a certain hazardous process or material or some sort of task. Uncertainty, well, we're all sort of uncertainty managers. We're aiming to understand the level of risk, and we're trying to reduce the uncertainty around that task. So we're aiming to understand and manage uncertainty by putting in place effective controls, monitoring those controls. And our objectives are our desired future performance. So in occupational health and safety point of view, our primary objective is to stop people getting hurt. So we can set a series of criteria to help us with those objectives, define those objectives. So our risk-based approach really says that, first of all, we need to make sure our leadership team and executive are going to commit the organisation to stopping things going wrong. Really, we need them to commit to that, put some resources in place to enable us to achieve our goal of stopping things going wrong. Then we identify what could go wrong. We prioritise those, so we have some sort of process of prioritising those. We fix the things that are the highest priority, and then we keep repeating that until we've reduced those levels of risk to an acceptable level. So in a way, this is 5 steps to continuous improvement. This is really the core of what we're aiming to do in occupational health and safety. But obviously things get a bit more complicated. So the ISO 31000 defines a risk management architecture, which comprises these 3 elements. So first of all, our principles. So this is where the organisation commits to a risk-based approach. So we're not going to have a random sort of addressing of the way we manage threats to our success. We're going to do it in a systematic and customized manner for our organisation. So our principles guide us in the elements that will create value for our organisation. So in particular, we customize our risk-based approach to the organisational needs and performance. And each of these elements have a series of points that assist us with defining how the organisation is going to benefit from having this risk-based approach throughout. Once we've established that the organisation is going to benefit from that, we have our continuous improvement process. So this used to be plan, do, check, act. So you can see we design. So we plan, we implement the plan, we evaluate the performance of the plan, and then if we've not complied with the plan or we've had some incidents, we investigate those. We understand how to improve, and we feed those back into our management system, and we cycle our continuous improvement process like that to achieve our goals. Now, our risk management process is the thing that everybody really understands about risk management. So this is the process of identifying, assessing, and controlling our risks. I just want to draw your attention to this piece up here: scope, context, and criteria. So this risk management process can be applied to risk management of any size or scope of threat to the business. So our scope determines whether we're going to do a risk assessment of the whole oil rig or the whole facility, or are we just going to do something like something smaller, like carrying some boxes from point A to B. So our scope defines the size of that risk assessment. The context is the justification for it. So why are we going to do that risk management plan? And our criteria are our agreed thresholds of acceptability. So we're going to set a series of risk criteria that determine where we're aiming to go. As we said before, these are our objectives. So then we identify what could go wrong. We analyze how likely that is and the severity of that, and we compare that to our criteria in the risk evaluation stage, which then determines whether we need to go ahead and put in some risk treatments. So if we're below our risk criteria, we don't need to do anything. If we're above our risk criteria, we do need to do something to manage that risk and improve. Then we have a bit of a reality check. So we make sure we're in contact with our workforce. So we consult with our workforce to make sure we haven't missed anything, that it's a true reflection of what's actually going on. And we also look at our system to make sure that it's performing as we want. Okay, so we could go for a whole semester on what this goes into, but I just wanted to give a bit of an update on a reminder on our risk management approach. So why does risk management add value? Okay, so first of all, we're going to be committing to getting rid of the things that could go wrong or managing the threats to our success. So it adds value because we're actually going to investigate what things are going to be preventing our success and doing something about it. And because we've committed to that and made some resources available, then we can actually get on and we can manage our the threats to our success. Also, because the way we're embedding the risk-based throughout our organization, we're going to need to put in place an organizational culture or evolve the organizational culture to value the risk-based approach. This is quite a major undertaking, particularly if the culture is poor, but we need to make sure that we've got a good organizational culture to accept this adding value through risk management. The next point that I want to talk about is that the leadership team are accountable. So in the risk-based approach, as you saw, the leadership team need to commit to the implementation of our risk-based approach, and we hold the leadership team accountable for that so that things actually get done. To enable the leadership team to fulfill the requirements of our risk-based approach, they need to create a network of people in their teams who have that common goal of preventing things going wrong. So our organizational culture comes from the leadership team creating a network of people with a common goal. It adds value because we're also going to work systematically through the things that could cause us to be unsuccessful in a priority order. So the things in health and safety that are a priority are injuries and fatalities. So let's address the things that could cause injuries and fatalities first, and then we'll get on with the other things after that. In the legislation, we call that a safe system of work. So we're going to put in place safe systems of work, which are the agreed ways of working without injuries, which is also the basis of the work health and safety legislation that's in Western Australia and the other states, except Victoria, which have their own way of doing things. But in effect, the legislation is a risk-based approach which requires the leadership team to ensure that people don't get hurt by managing the risks and threats to the organisation. The leadership team have a series of requirements which are known as due diligence, which basically say that they've got to have an understanding of what could go wrong, put in place resources to ensure that things don't go wrong, and verify those things are in place. So very important. Okay, so now I just want to talk a little bit about these risk criteria. So what are the risk criteria and why are they so useful? So let's imagine that we're managing risk over time. So we can have a look at our past performance and help to help us with predicting our future performance. We're going to look at our performance on a scale of risk, so injury risk, for example, and we're going to manage that so that we can improve our performance to our desired future level. So let's have a look at a scenario. So such as this. So we're saying that we've got an increasing level of risk in our organization. In other words, our performance is reducing because our risk is increasing. So this means that we're progressive in this organization, we're progressively getting worse up until the point of today, where it's the highest it's been for the last period of time. So the organization then says, well, look, we need to do something about this. We recognize that this isn't adequate, so we want to do something about this. So we're going to establish some risk criteria. Now, if we establish risk criteria, in other words, the threshold or milestone of risk, if we establish that above where we're at the moment, we can say that that indicates that we've got a high tolerance of risk, because we're allowing this level of risk to carry on increasing, so we can keep going as we are. This indicates a poor risk attitude. So risk attitude is the behavior of the organization towards risk. So we want to demonstrate that the organization has a positive risk attitude. In other words, they're going to address the level of risk. So we would set a level of risk tolerance below our existing level of risk, which is here. We set our level of risk tolerance below that, which is a positive risk attitude. In other words, to achieve that from where we are now to this point, we need to do something different, because otherwise, if we don't do anything different, this is just going to carry on going up. So a positive risk attitude indicates that we're going to have a lower tolerance of risk than we have at the moment. Okay. Now, we also need to set some other future desired risk criteria. So we call that our acceptable level of risk. And our acceptable level of risk is really the point at which we can slow down or we can stop change. So if our tolerated level of risk was the thing that initiates change, our acceptable level of risk is where we can slow down or stop. So what that means is that we're going to have two sets of risk criteria. First of all, our tolerated level of risk, which is primarily to address the high severity incidents or risks, and our future desired state, which are our KPIs, which could be ALARP, as low as reasonably practicable, or other definitions of criteria that the leadership team decide upon. Importantly, these two risk criteria are the outcome of leadership decisions. So the leadership team need to decide what is tolerated and what is acceptable. We define those and we cascade that information throughout the organization. So for example, you could say, we will not tolerate people hitting the boss. If you hit the boss, then you've exceeded the tolerated level of risk, and therefore there's going to be consequences. We could say our acceptable level of risk is no injuries. So anything above acceptable means that we've got some actions to do to bring that level of risk down. Okay, so let's say that then we're going to work out what do we need to do. So if we carry on as we are today, our level of risk is going to stay is at this level. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to work out what do we need to do to bring our level of risk from where we are today down to our tolerated level of risk. These are our highest priorities. And then once we've achieved those, we're then going to have a look about what we need to do to bring us down to acceptable level of risk. So as we implement the actions in response to this high priority, hopefully we'll start to see our level of risk coming down. Now, when that level of risk comes down, we've no longer got this gap in performance. So we need to think about what that means. So what we're going to do then is we're going to replace that first tolerated level of risk with a new tolerated level of risk. So the leadership team say that we need to create some constructive pressure on the organization. So we're going to create a new tolerated level of risk, which replaces the first level of tolerated risk. We're going to keep in place the systems and the processes that have enabled us to achieve that new level of risk, but we're going to create some more action, and we've redefined the gap from here to here by putting in place this new tolerated level of risk, and then we're going to work towards those. So in effect, we end up with our new tolerated level of risk, which we're going to move towards. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about how we go about defining the improvements that we need to make. So this is, imagine we're at today and we've had a trigger event, so some sort of event that is going to trigger action. We're going to investigate that and we're going to work out what we can do to improve. Now, let's say that this incident was, say, a haul truck going off the road because the driver had fallen asleep. So we've got a fatigue issue. So we need to make sure that we address fatigue in the organization. Now, we can just go and hire some professor or expert in fatigue, and maybe they'll say, look, read my textbook or read this report and implement that and you'll be all right. Well, unless we talk to the people who are subject to that fatigue management process, it's not going to work. So what we need to do is we need to consider our improvements and how they're going to be implemented and sustained in the future. It's critical that we design our improvement actions in response to the trigger with the people who have to implement them. Because those people not only have the incident that we've just had, they've also had all of the other incidents and other actions that have come from historical incidents. So we need to understand the impact of these new improvement actions on the operations. So what we see then is, if you see the area below the graph, this represents the residual risk coming down. But to achieve that, our people involved in the sustaining actions have an increasing amount of work to do to sustain that. We've got to take account of that. So this working between the people above and below the line is critical to make sure that our actions are actually effective. We cannot just give actions from some sort of improvement initiative to the operations and expect it to work. In some research I'm doing at the moment, we're investigating this line and looking at what the gradient of the line actually means with regarding performance. So we're having a look at how to integrate some information into our risk score, plot that risk score, and then see what this gradient actually tells us about the performance of the organization. So you can see here that it's a shallower gradient, whereas here it's very steep. What does it mean about that? And what does that tell us about the capability of the organization? And we think we've come up with some really good ideas about how we can understand the gradient and how to improve the gradient. So if you want to know more about that, please let me know. The gradient, it comes from some of our understanding of the effectiveness of the organization's capability. So what we're working out is, over time, we can see that the organization has implemented a series of actions in response to incidents. But they don't always have a satisfactory impact on the level of risk. What we're doing at the moment is using that information about repeat incidents and understanding the performance of the organization in response to incidents to help us define the actions that people need to use in the future. In other words, there's no point putting in place actions that don't work. We need to make sure that those actions are actually going to work. And some of the research I'm doing at the moment is helping us to define the organizational capability for actions to make sure that we get best back for our money, making sure that we add value. Okay, now I just want to talk a little bit about communication. In particular, if we're out and about and we want to talk to our frontline workers as leaders, what do we need to talk about? Well, we've defined our criteria and we've got a good understanding of the criteria. As leaders, we're responsible and accountable for defining these criteria. So the things that we want to talk about to our frontline workers are about whether we've got any risks above the 2 risk criteria. And if we do, why is that? What's going on with those actions? Does it mean that they've been poorly designed, or does it mean they've been poorly implemented? So here's some things that we can talk about to some questions that we can use using the structure from 31,000, because we want to make sure that we've got each of the elements of our risk management architecture involved in and effective in the business. We don't just want to concentrate on our risk management process. We want to make sure that the principles and the framework are involved too. So first of all, let's think about the principles, and the aim is for them to add value. So these are the questions that you could ask to our leadership and our frontline. So we can ask them, how is the organizational approach designed to add value? So leaders or executive that have been involved in the response of the organization to the principles will have a pretty clear understanding of that, is that we've customized our approach, we've embedded it, we've integrated it throughout. Whereas someone who doesn't know what you're talking about probably won't be able to answer that question. If you're talking to frontline workers, maybe you could ask them about the name of the safe systems of work. So if that's called, the management system, you can ask them, what do they know about it? Get them to tell you a little bit about what they think about the system. Is it adding value? Our framework is all about improvements. Therefore, let's ask people, do they think we're having improvements in the performance of our business? And our process is all about understanding the level of risk and implementing controls. So we could ask the executive, how are you managing or communicating the toleration and acceptability of risk? We could also ask our front line, what's it like to do that job? So if they say it's an absolute terrible job, I've got a bad back, or my ears are ringing, or I've got bad lung function, we know then that we haven't got effective controls in place. So that simple question, what's the job like to do, can open up a series of conversations about the effectiveness of our control. Okay. Now, I'm going to use the risk-based approach to talk a little bit about the top 5 things that we need to do in psychosocial well-being. So to start off with, I just want to mention a couple of things about what psychosocial hazards are. So this comes from the Code of Practice from Western Australia, but there's also a Safe Work Australia one for which has informed this West Australian one. So first of all, in the Act, it talks about having a risk-based approach. So that requires organisations to have a health management plan, particularly in the mining industry, and in the oil and gas or the offshore, a safety case. So in other words, they've identified the health hazards associated with their organisation and put in place a plan to manage that to an acceptable level. So psychosocial hazards, let's have a look at those. What are they? Well, they're hazards that may cause a psychological harm, such as stress, fatigue, bullying, violence, and so on. Importantly, our psychosocial hazards may have an effect in the short term, so they could have an effect right now, or they could have an effect in the future. And that effect can be an acute or post-traumatic. So in other words, it's very difficult for us to forecast the outcome of exposure to these hazards. It could happen now, it could happen in the future. Makes managing these quite tricky. The other thing I mention about psychosocial hazards is they're seen as being contagious. So if you're involved in a team and there's a mental health incident, then you're at more higher risk than if you hadn't been part of that team. So there's a certain contagion of psychosocial risk, which is again quite unusual. Now the Code of Practice and other information asks us to focus on the work arrangements. So in other words, what can we do to at the workplace to manage the risk of a series of issues, which I'm going to put up in the screen in a moment. So it's to do with work. However, some people are more vulnerable than others. So whilst we can put in place arrangements at work, we've also got to take account of people who are young and inexperienced, people that come from different language groups or have different gender identities. Some groups of people are more vulnerable than the others, and we've got to take account of that in our workplace. So I just put up this list of issues because our risk-based approach, identification, assessment and control is informed by the identification of hazards. So this is the list from the new Code of Practice, or the draft Code of Practice for FIFO workers. So it hasn't been released yet. I've put it up because I think it's quite useful to share that there is a new code being discussed at the moment. And this information comes from that. So if you've got an opportunity, maybe you can contribute to some feedback to the government or through your chamber or other industry group towards this Code of Practice and help it be improved. So the things that I want to talk about here, first of all, we need to make sure that we've got a good organisational culture to conduct our risk assessment, because we want people to tell us some things that are going on in their heads. These aren't things that we can go out and go out and measure, like noise or heat or hazardous substances. We need people to be open and honest and feel that they're not going to be victimized if they tell us some information about what's actually going on in the workplace. This is quite a difficult thing to do, so be aware that we want to set up our risk assessments with an open and honest and fair working environment. Now, there's a code of practice, which I often call the 3 C's: consultation, cooperation and coordination, which talks about how we can create that environment. So our first step of the risk management process is the identification. And look at it, it's quite a big list of things that we need to consider in our risk assessment. So these are the things that we're going to have a look at, the potential severity and likelihood. So have a look through these, have a look at the code of practices to get some more information about what each of these things actually mean and what we can do about them. Because these are the things that we need to manage, that we must manage in our workplaces. Okay, the last couple of slides. I just want to give my top 5 hints and tips for psychosocial well-being. First of all, be educated. This whole area of the risk-based approach to psychosocial well-being takes some learning. It's not sort of an instinctive thing. It doesn't often get included in training unless there's some sort of purposeful inclusion of this. So get yourself educated in this area. So have a look at the Enough is Enough report, the Code of Practice. The Enough report started all of this off really, and is a reflection of how the FIFO industry was treating females. And even if you don't want to read the whole 174 pages, just have a look at the first few pages, particularly the preface and the verbatim quotes from witnesses in there, enough to send shivers down your spine. So yeah, have a look at that. Make sure that you've got a good understanding of what your company is aiming to do, and attend some training so that you can ensure that you know what the expectations are and the facilities available. The government MARS program, so Mental Awareness, Respect and Safety program, has a huge number of services available. There's 15 odd services available in a whole variety of different services for you to make use of. My second point is be aware. So people are often in one of these 3 groups. So victims. So people are going to get seriously injured. Whilst it's a new addition to the way that we're operating, so the Act was updated a couple of years ago to include psychosocial well-being. So it's quite new for us, but people are being seriously injured. And in fact, there's been suicides. So we've got potential fatalities here. We mustn't forget that there are victims to that, people being injured. Bystanders. So this is people who can help with the situation. We need to make sure that we know what to do and we can assist if we're called upon. So we need a bit of training, some understanding of what bystanders can do. One of the more recent approaches is to assist people, the perpetrators, to take action to prevent them breaking the law. A lot of what we're talking about, sexual harassment and other physical harm, is breaking the law. And a few organisations are then saying, well, we can't really help you if you've broken the law. That's going to be a police issue. But we can make sure that you understand how to control that level of risk yourself. So taking action to stop harm occurring. My next point is the work and the non-work. So we can only manage work factors, but we need to be aware that non-work issues will influence our behaviour in the workplace. So we need to make sure that we account for that. If people have had a really bad morning and they come to work depressed or upset, that's going to influence the work that they're doing in the workplace. So we need to take account of that. The second point there, people are different. Everybody comes from a different background, have different experiences, different skills. We need to be aware of that and account for that in our risk-based approach, because they'll need different controls. People from different cultures need different controls for psychosocial well-being. Point 4, linked closely to the point 2, make sure you know your role. In particular, the organizational approach to stop poor behavior. So if something's not right, you need to know how to make sure that that behavior can be prevented to cause any harm, which may mean that there's some sort of reporting system. And I know that the government have got an anonymous reporting process, if that's the easiest way to go. Incivility is this another word for rudeness, and some research has shown that if people are rude to each other and that isn't challenged and it becomes acceptable, then there's an accumulation of rudeness. So the next time or over the next period, someone may be a little bit more rude, and so on, until, maybe one day you get a touch on the shoulder and then, some sort of harassment. So we need to think carefully about how we behave to each other, and particularly see if we can reduce the incivility, reduce the rudeness and poor behavior. And then my fifth point is the risk-based approach. So this diagram here comes from the Code of Practice, which talks about our risk-based approach. So have a look at the Code of Practice for the 3 C's to make sure that you've got a good environment for people to be open and honest about what's going on in the workplace, so that you can risk assess it and put in place effective controls. Make sure that you consider all the different diverse groups in your risk assessments. You may have to do several risk assessments, one for each of those diverse groups. And think about managing this as if it's a fatality. It's changed the way that I think about things. When you think, okay, yes, we can have suicides over this, therefore we need to treat this as a potential fatal injury. It's not just a lower consequence. We must consider this as a potential fatal injury. And I know many organisations now are starting to apply the catastrophic risk management approach to psychosocial well-being, which I thoroughly endorse. I'm doing some work having a look at the non-work variables and having a look about how those can influence our understanding of work at work. I've created a model that we're going to call the bubble model, and I'll talk more about that later on. Now, finally, what now? So, in summary, we've got to make sure that our risk-based approach is adding value to all of the threats to the organisation. We need to make sure the leadership team have created a network of people with a common goal to prevent injuries. And I've asked people to conduct their risk assessments and implement a series of controls to ensure psychosocial well-being, monitor that to make sure that it's effective. Thank you. I hope that was useful. If you'd like to contact me, there's my details. Thank you. Goodbye.